Cult Movie Cult, where we watch and discuss the horrific, the obscure, and the flat-out strange from the other side of cinema. I'm Mark Dickerson.
And I'm Jeremy Fink, and this is the sixth installment in our series 80s Indies. Today we'll be discussing a killer film, 1986's River's Edge.
I figure once you start fighting, you're always defending yourself. Me? I get in a fight, I go fucking crazy, you know? Everything goes black. And then I fucking explode, you know, like it's the end of the world. And who cares if this guy wastes me, because I'm going to waste him first. I mean, the whole world's going to blow up anyway. I might as well keep my pride. I got this philosophy. You do shit, and it's done. And then you die. You got any more beer?
River's Edge, directed by Tim Hunter and starring Keanu Reeves, Crispin Glover, and Dennis Hopper, follows a group of teenagers in a Northern California town who are forced to deal with their friend's murder of his girlfriend Jamie and the subsequent disposal of her body.
Yeah, River's Edge. This is kind of a hard one to pin down, for sure, but we're going to try to dive in here and see what we can figure out about this one.
Yes.
So plot-wise, story-wise, the film starts off with an image of a child who we later find out to be Tim, who is, I guess he's like a preteen, a little bit younger than a teen, and he's by the river, and he throws a doll into the river, and we watch as it go down, which is, obviously very symbolic for what's about to happen. And from there, we hear this painful wail, and we don't know, like, it's almost like a scream, and we don't know what it is. And this is when we first see the main character, Samson, and he is just sitting by the edge of the river's edge, and he is just crying and wailing. And at the same time, right off the bat, we are introduced to a stark image of a deceased young woman's naked body, and she's laying next to him. So that's how the movie begins. So that's a hell of a beginning.
Yeah, pretty jarring right away.
Yeah,
you're right
really,
in it.
Really kicks things off, and it certainly reminded me of the opening to Twin Peaks, the series. It has that same small town murder thing going on, and obviously the dead woman's body in the water. Though obviously this one is not as Lynchian, but it definitely has its own, I would say, offbeat and sometimes quirky vibe. Would you agree with that?
Yes, although since it came up already, fun production fact, this movie was lensed by Frederick Elms, who is David Lynch's longtime cinematographer who shot Eraserhead and Blue Velvet, and also Valley Girl, as we already talked about in this series. So I think if there is some of a David Lynch feel, it's probably coming from the camera, maybe more than anything else.
That makes a lot of sense. And Tim Hunter, the director of this film, he didn't go on to do much after this. We're going to talk about him a little bit later on, but he did direct a couple episodes of Twin Peaks, I believe, as well. So there are some connections here, and obviously some Lynch connections with the cast.
Yes.
And I definitely want to talk about the cast of this movie, because I think, I mentioned the offbeat and somewhat quirky vibe of the movie, and I think a lot of that has to do with the cast and the actors. Great cast of characters here inhabiting this town, and they kind of make the movie what it is to me. Like when I think of this movie, I think immediately of the cast. And so we have Keanu Reeves as Matt, and he's sort of like the doubtful one, the one who I would say out of all the characters maybe feels the most conflicted about what's going on. We have Crispin Glover, who is Lane, Matt's friend, and he takes a very different turn in how he handles what's going on. And Crispin Glover is just Crispin Glover, but we'll talk about him too. And of course, we can't forget Dennis Hopper as Feck. Feck. I'm gonna be saying Feck a lot during this podcast, and it's a hell of a name and hell of a character. He's really out there. But again, just these are the things that make this movie memorable, and I think make it a cult movie because the type of story it is, you could see it as like an Oscar winner, like contender or something like that. You could see it as a very mainstream type film, but the way this movie is handled, it's just very offbeat, and I'm going to keep using that word too, probably, because and a lot of it is the way, not only that it's acted, but also just the story itself is very strange. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So right off the bat, another thing I want to say is that thing that makes this film stand out a lot to me is that the tone is very, it goes kind of back and forth. I think we talked about this a little bit, Jeremy, before we started recording today, about you weren't really sure of the tone of the film a lot of the time. And that's because a lot of the time it's very nonchalant, but then also there's these very serious moments. And I think it's that kind of juxtaposition between the everyday teenage antics that we see and the dark and complicated, more adult events like the murder, obviously, that make this movie unique and would make it stand out. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that was the thing, because this is the first time I watched this movie, which always exciting to get to watch something new for the podcast. But yeah, I had a really hard time placing the tone with this one, which was really intriguing, because I couldn't tell, because especially with these teenagers, they're seeing the body and everything for the first time, and the response is so casual. And my first thought was, having not seen it, and I try when I see a new film to really not research it ahead of time. I like to kind of go in blind.
Yeah.
So my first thought was this was almost like, which I think this actually predates it by a year or two, but I almost got like a Heathers feel, where it's like the way
that
death...
darkly comedic.
Darkly comedic. Like, they're looking at a
Dealing
body
with
and none of them are really having a reaction. Like, they're like poking the body with a stick, but then when they realize it's a real body, the first reaction isn't any of them having a freak out. It's just kind of like a casual, like, oh geez, well that...
Yeah. So anyway,
like, wow, you're in deep shit, man. Even though that's their friend. So I was like,
or they just go back into like the teenage gossip or whatever they're...
and I was like, oh, that's very strange. But because the depiction of the dead body is so graphic and gruesome, I'm like I don't feel that way. Like this doesn't feel like comedic. So it's very strange, which I like. I think I like. I definitely am gonna need to dig back into this one, but I think I like how strange it is, because I think that because I wouldn't, and I don't know about you, Mark, I wouldn't call this film realism necessarily.
Well, but in some ways, maybe.
In some ways, but I do think that the thing that's kind of most realistic is the way that when human beings deal with tragedy, it's very confusing, and a lot of the time it's presented in film and literature as like we find out about some tragic event and immediately have a cathartic big response. Right. But a lot of the time in real life, you hear stories about people like finding out a family member has died and not actually accepting reacting, like they just keep reading their newspaper. And
everyone, like you said, everyone reacts differently to things, and some people would even laugh, you know what I mean? Just because that's their first gut reaction to something, because out of surprise or shock or whatever. So you really can't judge it, and that's part of the reason I say that this movie, even though it is so strange and odd in a lot of ways, it's the way that they deal with it is probably more realistic than a lot of films that we've seen about this sort of thing. And it is actually based on a true case, which I'm going to talk about a little bit towards the end. But so this is based on a real event, and the kids in that story, the teenagers in that real event, acted very much the same as they do in the film. So it's one of those real life is stranger than fiction type things. But to go back to, we talked about the juxtaposition between the teenage life and the dark things that are going on. And I think that's exemplified right off the bat. So we see that the dead body of the young woman, which is a, very horrifying and frightening image, very sad. And then Samson, who is with the body, and we presume the one who murdered the woman, gets up and leaves and drives to the convenience store. And he starts trying to buy beer, and he's underage. But that's like that's like a normal scene, scene that you would see in a teenage film, movie about teenagers, or like a teen comedy or whatever. So right off the bat, I feel like they established that the film is going to kind of bounce around and make you have these different emotions about things, which is, I think, a good way to go about it. So from there, we are introduced to Dennis Hopper, who plays Feck, as we mentioned. He's an older man, drug dealer, who we're introduced to in his derelict house, wailing on a saxophone next to his girlfriend, in quotations, an inflatable doll named Ellie. So that's that character alone, I feel like puts this into cult territory.
Yeah.
It's like he's just so out there and so bizarre, but also kind of sad. You start
Yeah.
to realize like how sad and conflicted of a character he is. But anyway, so he comes off as very not as manic as Crispin Glover maybe, but he comes off a little paranoid. Supposedly the cops are still after him because he shot a woman a long time ago, and or what he says was his old girlfriend, and he's clearly a very mentally disturbed man. And but he does kind of hang out, I guess, with these teenagers that we're introduced to, both Crispin Glover and Keanu Reeves, of course. And so they're buying drugs from him. And so not only did I think of just how strange this movie is, but it not only seems realistic, but also it reminded me of the film Stand By Me.
Yeah, I was thinking of that as well.
And it actually came out the same year, which I didn't realize at first, but when I looked it up, it's like a slightly older. When I say older, I mean like teenagers instead of like younger kids dealing with it. But what reminded me of it was the one character, Tim, who is the younger brother of Keanu Reeves in the movie. He even says the line, "Want to see a dead body?"
Yeah.
And when he said that, it just made me think of Stand By Me. So that's another similar kind of movie with these kids dealing with having a dead body on their hands. Like, how do you act or react or not react? But this movie is more about, I would say, teenage apathy. There's a lot of angst and apathy in the film.
Yeah.
And that nonchalant quality we talked about. I think someone says to Samson's character when he goes to school the next day, like, "Where's Jamie?" And he's like, "I killed her."
Yeah.
And that's the next words out of his mouth. And no joke, just stone faced.
Just stone faced, yeah.
And then everyone's just like kind of laughing because they don't know how to take it. But then Samson actually takes them, and he shows Matt and Lane the body by the edge of the river, which is where the movie gets its name. And I want to talk about the reaction, Jeremy, because we hit on it a little bit here. But what did you think of the reactions of the other characters when they see the body?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, it's just very strange because I was kind of waiting for that moment where one of them has a freak out. You know what I mean? It's like we get the mixed, which I like. I love that they're mixed reaction, but I was just waiting for one of them to realize what it was. But just the fact that all of them just had such a strange kind of casual, just like oh, that's weird. He actually did it. Because it was almost like they were more shocked that he actually did it than they were seeing a dead body. It was like, wow, he wasn't full of it. He actually did the thing he said he did.
You also get that when he said that to them, like, "I killed her," like, that's something that he probably
he would just say,
strange stuff like that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you have a good weekend. Yeah. He just murdered 12 people. And
exactly.
Like that's just his character. But it is, and the word that, and I think we probably have said it at least once or twice in this conversation already. The word that kept popping into my mind is grim. It's just such a grim take. At least the first 2/3 of the film. Just feels so grim and kind of hopeless to me. Because it's like you see the police doing their job. It's not one of those situations where it's like the police are ignoring what's going on. As soon as they find out, they start taking action. But it's just kind of like it just feels like these characters are just living in such a bleak, hopeless existence where there's a dead body and all they can do is kind of sit around and smoke weed and be like, that's kind of weird, isn't it? Like,
yeah, I think one of them says, "This is unreal." And then another reaction they had was they were like saying how it's like a movie. How this is all like a movie, which was interesting. It seems like the teenagers, this is just another thing to them. Like they see it and they're like, and I don't know if it's because they can't process it fully or what it is exactly, but when they see the body, it's like, okay, and now we move on to the next thing, and then it goes back to the teenage politics, and we see a lot of that in this film with the school scenes, like how they try and govern themselves and their own rules and codes they live by and stuff like that.
The hippie teacher who's talking to them about protest and standing up, but at the same time, he's in a classroom and his message is falling on deaf ears, and and he's saying all the other hippies are executives now. It is interesting to me that this movie came out in the 80s. Because I think it had a kind of distinctly early 90s feel to it in a weird way, at least in terms of the ideology. I could see someone who's into Nirvana just eating this movie up.
Yeah, well, it kind of has that little bit of like a punk aesthetic to it.
Yeah, and it's like
maybe what would become grunge, like the apathy and all that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it
Yeah.
does in that way. I guess it does feel kind of ahead of its time, because I do think it was
I can see
definitely
that.
hitting a nerve in terms of this idea.
It has been noted that this movie may be the first depiction of Generation X on film, actually.
That's really interesting.
I think I read that somewhere. I don't know if it's the very first, but obviously like speculated to be the first or one of the first. So that's very interesting that you brought that up, because that's definitely something that other people have noted as well.
Yeah, because it almost feels, in terms of everything else we've watched in this series, this almost feels out of place, which is exciting that we're finding something like that.
I think the films that we've watched have been all over the place in terms of tone and types of films that they are, and I think that's a good thing. I think variety is one of the things that we strive for on this show, and also at the same time showing how these films are related in a certain way.
Yeah.
And enjoying a series on them in that way.
But I would say, to me, everything else we've talked about so far did feel very 80s. And this to me just, it doesn't totally, with the exception of kind of how the characters talk.
Yeah.
It does feel kind of like it came from a few years after it actually came out.
We're also progressing in time as well.
True.
As we're continuing the series. So this is our second to last episode. But yeah, we're getting on in the 80s now. So it's 86 when this came out. And so you mentioned the teacher, and I found that interesting because one of the things I noted about this film was that this is essentially kids that are in this very grown-up situation. And again, it goes back to like, what can they even really understand about it, because they are so young. And then so to continue on with the story, so eventually more teenagers are shown the location of this body, and we keep returning to that very stark image of her, of the woman's deceased body there, and by the edge of the river. And eventually, I think they're going to move her, or they want to try to move her body. And I think someone's just like, I think it's actually Samson who says she's heavy.
Yeah.
And they just walk away.
Heavy, yeah.
And the next time we see them, they're just playing arcade games in in an arcade. So, that's again that tone there. But it's like it's comedic, but also sad, and also tragic and kind of scary. Yeah, it's all those things. And so I mentioned the doll in the first scene that's thrown into the river by Matt's younger brother Tim, and we are introduced then to Matt's younger sister, and she is having like a burial for the doll in the backyard, and he helps her put the crucifix in the ground. And so there's that kind of symbolism going on too, that sort of like loss of innocence type of thing as well. And Matt, so Keanu Reeves' character, I would say, like I mentioned before, he wants nothing to do with any of this. He wants nothing to do with the body. He feels very conflicted about it. And he starts to think about like what is actually going on here. And then from there, we see what is the only brief glimpse that we get into Samson's home life. And he is taking care of his aunt, I believe.
I think so.
Yeah. At first, I know they mentioned his mother died, but I didn't know if that was just a rumor that had gone around school or not. But I believe it's his aunt. And she seems, I guess, mentally incapable of caring for herself. So you sort of get this other side to Samson, or John, as they call him. For a very funny reason that if you watch the movie you'll find out, but it's so like convoluted. But so anyway, so Samson is taking care of his aunt, and so you kind of see this other side to him, and it's kind of interesting in that way. But that's really all we get as far as his home life. We get some things that he says later on, but that's about it. And then from there we see Lane, who is played by the great Crispin Glover. He actually goes back to the site of where the body is, and he decides to bury the body himself, or what we assume is him burying the body. Later, he's driving with Samson, and they see cop cars with their lights on, and they get kind of freaked out. They get spooked, and then from there, we see Matt showing the police the body, or trying to, because where he takes them to the edge of the river, the body is no longer there. So they actually the police pull the body from the river. So I guess Lane had thrown the body in the river at some point. Yeah. And they start to get... Now, I found this interesting as well, this aspect of the film. So Matt is the only one telling the truth, the only one coming out and saying what everyone else should have been saying, which is there's a dead woman here. We need to figure out what's going on. We need to tell the family or whatever. So he tries to do this, and tries to do what is essentially the right thing. And he is taken in for interrogation. The police are very suspicious of him, and they accuse him essentially of being the murderer. And he's just basically like, "Yeah, man, this is what happened. Like, I'm telling you," very Keanu way. Yeah. And this is very early Keanu, by the way. I think this is before Bill and Ted. I actually think he was noticed because of this film, and is also why he was kind of typecast into this sort of slacker role. Yeah. Because he just plays it so well. I mean, he's just,
well, I think I remember. I saw the film The Bad Batch a few years back.
I haven't seen that.
Anna Lily Armapour, and Keanu Reeves is in that movie, and he actually came and did a talk back at that event. And I was, I was kind of expecting him to be different doing a talk back, but like he just has that Keanu vibe, and I think he can hide it when he's acting, but I think there's something just inherent in who he is as a human being.
Yeah, because he can play all. Yeah, he can play all kinds of different characters. Like, he could be Neo from The Matrix or whatever, John Wick. But I mean, he had a lot of these roles early on, so he was sort of typecast into that. But again, I think he just plays these types of characters so well. And so we see that scene with the police interrogating him, or he's kind of answering questions for them, I guess. And you see this distrust of adults in the film. Except for Feck, because he's their drug dealer. But I did notice that a lot. There's the parents, like Matt's mother and her boyfriend, I guess, who Matt's very, very skeptical of, and the teacher and these police. So you see this kind of like adults versus teenagers sort of thing, which is real. I mean, it's something that happens and goes on. And like I said, even Matt's mother's boyfriend doesn't believe him, and they sort of get in an altercation at this point. And then he's with his brother Tim, who sort of like runs away out of the house. And Tim says that he saw Matt on the phone, and he calls him a traitor. So that's pretty like that's indicative of like how maybe a younger kid would view the situation. Like, oh man, you ratted, you called the cops, Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. And then the other scene. So with these other interactions we get, and this is like, so we have this kind of crazy cast of characters in a way, and they're all so like unique and strange and well acted, I thought. And then we have these different scenes of different characters actually interacting with each other, and some of the most fascinating scenes, I thought, Jeremy, were between Samson and Feck, because these are two outsiders, but two very different outsiders, and you see how that plays out eventually. But there's the "Are you a psycho?" scene that they have when they're by the river, where they're just asking each other that question. It's very interesting because you never see scenes like that in movies, and you never really see that in real life, obviously. So to me, it was just sort of fascinating to watch these two characters interact with each other. Yeah, because they are both so strange, but there's that big age difference and obviously other differences as well. But well,
it's weird because in a way, it's like the characters in this film who are kind of doing the most off-putting stuff are kind of the most human.
In certain ways.
Yeah. Because like Matt, the Keanu Reeves character, I think he has an element of humanity because he wants to do the right thing. But even then, like his arc and how he behaves through that time, like I don't know, like he does ultimately go to the police, but it takes him a little while. He gets distracted, like hooking up with a girl. Well, in the middle,
say, there's even some teenage romance.
But it's like one of those things where it's like I don't know, he's interesting, but you think about it, the Dennis Hopper character and John, so Feck and John, this relationship we were talking about, like they have done the most atrocious things in the whole movie, but we kind of get the most tender moments with them, and we also get tender moments with the Crispin Glover character as well, even though he's someone who's trying to cover up a murder for reasons that I'm not sure he even understands.
No, I think he's just very manic and on drugs and I don't know. He has like I talked about that teenage code, It's like they have their own like rules they live by, and I feel like he very much tries to do that.
Well, I think it was kind of just a panic for him too.
Well, that too.
Because it is one of those things. It's like you don't really, which is why I keep going in circles on this. I'm like, I'm not sure if this is one of the like the most fascinating things or if it's just like strange, but it is like a thing where he had probably the smallest reaction of anybody.
Lane?
Yeah, like to first seeing the body. Or
Yeah.
one of the
Well, I guess
smallest.
he's always acting kind of strange and crazy, so yeah, I guess
Yeah,
that's what you
but
mean.
it's a thing where it's like when he sees and obviously spoilers ahead on this show, so if you haven't
As
watched
always.
it, which if you haven't watched it, I'm sure you're very confused by this point anyways. But yeah, like when he sees his friend John dead at the end, he has a visceral reaction and he cries. Which to me and I love the way Crispin Glover played that moment because it was such like a manic little kid cry. It wasn't like an adult trying to hold it back. It was like he saw this thing and just broke.
It was like that's unfair, you know.
Yeah, it's like it's unfair.
Yeah.
That's my friend, but like to me, it's almost like that's him reacting to both of the dead bodies he's seen.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that one little crying moment.
It catches up to him.
Yeah, like it catches up to him, but it's like it catches up to the movie too, where it's like all this whole movie where no one's really had any reactions. When people are getting upset, it's over a lot smaller stuff. You know, it's over a kid not coming home on time to his parents. It's like the little things people are freaking out about in this movie, but the big things people are relatively calm about. And like that's the moment where I feel like the movie kind of breaks and the characters in it kind of break and we get this real visceral release after all of that.
Yeah. It's kind of cathartic in a way.
Yeah, which I think is like you said, this is kind of the first Gen X movie is kind of indicative of that. And I feel like, you know, millennials have a little bit of this thing too, and if we're talking about generational worldviews, where it's like they just kind of saw so much shit. Like you're talking about like kids who were raised during Vietnam, and when they were just seeing crazy stuff just constantly in their lives, and they become kind of numb to it.
Yeah.
Early on in their lives, and it's hard to break them, and so that moment, at least personally, that was probably my favorite moment of the film. It's just when we finally see one of them crack. It's like, how far can one of these people who can handle anything, who's just bored, nothing is exciting, they've seen violence on the 6 o'clock news every single night, like at what point does something actually shake that person?
Right. Definitely. Yeah, that was a very powerful scene. And also what you alluded to, Jeremy, was that this movie doesn't really have a main character, essentially. It's a type of film where kind of like She's Gotta Have It, which was the previous film we talked about. There are lots of different characters and you don't know any one character too well.
Yeah.
Which I found interesting. You know, there are, I would say, a decent amount of examples of that in film, but this is certainly one of those. But I think it makes sense for this type of story because we just get a moment to touch on each of these characters' lives and certain things might stay with us, but we never really get to know any of these characters that well.
Yeah,
I would say
that's an interesting observation. Yeah, because I guess in my mind I felt like Keanu Reeves, the Matt, was kind of the main character, but I think that's just because Keanu Reeves is really charismatic, and I'm used to seeing Keanu Reeves as the main character. But
if this was like a standard mainstream film, I feel like he
would have been. Yeah, because he was kind of. I think his reaction and the arc he went through was kind of closest to how most people would react, or at least and not how most people would react, how most people think they would react, and how he treated it. So it kind of felt like watching it like he was kind of the center of the film. But really, I'd be curious, and I don't know if anyone's done this. I'm probably not going to take the time to do it, but if there is like a screen time breakdown on a movie like this, because it's true, it is an ensemble piece. It's not one of those films that draws attention to the fact that it's an ensemble piece. It doesn't feel like if I were to describe it to someone, I wouldn't say this is a film that's about a bunch of different characters.
Yeah.
To me, it's like the main character is almost just. It's kind of hard to place, but the main character to me is almost the feeling.
Yeah.
Like kind of this general sense of dread, like the you know is the tone to me feels like the main character.
Yeah, it's because it's not even like the town, which is, you know, when you talk about Twin Peaks, it's not even really like the town is the character either. It's like, and I agree. Like I honestly didn't even think of the fact that this was an ensemble movie until almost the end of the film. So yeah, I agree. It's more about the feeling, and it just kind of creeps up on you as you're watching it. But so it's very interesting in that regard.
Well, in a way, too, I guess you could kind of say that the young woman who was murdered is kind of the main character.
In a way,
in a strange way, too, because it is kind of just all about... She's kind of like the silent main character, where it's kind of just all about the reaction to what happens to her.
Yeah.
In the same way, if we're talking about a Twin Peaks, that the young woman, what's her name in that, Laura Palmer,
Hmm.
is kind of in the same way. Like, even though we're not necessarily seeing her all the time,
She's a
just this,
presence.
yeah, there's this presence, and I think that's a good way of putting it with this movie. Is there's a presence hanging over the movie that
Hmm.
maybe is her, or maybe just this general sense of death and grief
Yeah.
that is really the driving force behind the film, more than any single character,
Hmm.
more than any group of characters. It's kind of just how we process intense emotion.
Hmm. Definitely. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Um, and speaking of characters, so the characters that we're following right now in the film, they kind of go for a bit of a joyride, I guess. It's Samson and Feck are together with Ellie, of course, the inflatable doll, and
The inflatable Ellie.
and they go to the convenience store. Actually, the store that we saw early on in the film, where Samson tries to buy beer. We see them back in that convenience store, and that's where they run into Matt. And Samson goes like, "This guy giving you any trouble?" Like about the cashier, and Samson ends up pulling a gun on him on the cashier. And again, it's just like very nonchalant, and then he just like turns and walks away. And that's it. And like he doesn't shoot him or anything, but it's just something so eerie about it, and so like matter of fact, you know. And these are also like you know, not only are they young and disturbed in certain ways, they're also mentally unstable, most likely. I mean, it's up for debate, but Samson's character and Feck obviously as well. But anyway, so Matt just is like, "Whoa, that was weird." So also during this time, since Feck is gone, which he never leaves his house, by the way, he's sort of like a recluse. So he's out of the house, and Tim, which is again Matt's younger brother, the younger child from the first scene, he and a friend break into Feck's house while they're gone, and they find the motherload of weed in his closet. What I'm assuming was weed. It looked like weed. I don't know.
Yeah, it kind of looked like weed.
Yeah, they found some substances, whatever it was, and they were obviously elated at this. And so it just cuts to the next scene where, you know, again they're kind of going like on sort of a joyride. I think Samson sees this as like his last night out, because he knows what's going to happen to him, and he brings it up in a scene very soon. But I think he's smashing some windows, you know, from store windows and stuff like that. So they're just doing whatever. And Feck seems uncomfortable by the whole thing. Honestly, he seems very uncomfortable. And he's kind of just like holding on to his doll and kind of rocking back and forth the whole time. And then at this point, we mentioned a little teenage romance is thrown in as well, just a little bit, with Matt and Clarissa is her name. But even in that scene, they're talking about the body. They have like a little picnic on the lawn or on the grass, and the kids like to hang out around that river apparently. But they talk about narking. And so it's almost like I found it interesting that it's almost like Matt feels he has to apologize for being the one who called the cops. But a line that he has in that scene I thought was really good is he says, "I just keep seeing her face." And again, Jeremy, it's like you mentioned, like this is the image of the dead woman that keeps coming back.
Yeah. Well, and the way they framed her, like every time we saw her, her face had changed a little bit. Like she was kind of like decomposing, I guess. So yeah, coming back to that, it is interesting because like you said, like one character saying, "I just keep seeing her face," and as the audience, it's the same thing for us, where that's the image from the film that we keep coming back to.
It's like we just keep going, like, wait, what about the dead body? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
is anyone going to do anything about? Yeah,
yeah.
So it's like frustrating in a way, but also, yeah, like we said, sort of realistic to maybe how it would be. So back by the river, Samson starts taking some, I guess we'll say, liberties with Ellie as Feck pleads with him to stop. You know, he starts like joking around with the Ellie doll and doing inappropriate things with it, although I guess things that it was probably meant for. And Samson proceeds to, you know, he gets up and shouts over the river and starts shooting his gun. And he starts talking to Feck about Feck's murder, the one he had done years ago where he shot his girlfriend at the time. And, you know, Samson says, like, "You wanted to show her who was boss." And Feck responds with, "I loved her," you know?
Yeah. And
that's the big difference and what Feck sees as the major difference between the two of them. Because Samson felt nothing. And Feck, you know, this like destroyed him. So that contrast is pretty interesting as well. And it's like in this scene, it's like Samson wants to compare and contrast murders. Like it's a sick game to him, or a competition or something.
It's like almost fun for him.
Right. You kind of get that idea. Like he gets like a thrill out of it, sort of. Yeah. And we actually see a flashback during the scene, which is the first time we actually see Jamie alive, first and last. And this is as Samson is describing to Feck how he strangled her and had total control over her, felt so real. He says felt so alive. So that's how he describes that. And which is, very disturbing, obviously. And basically, like I said, at this point, Samson knows that he's not going to make it much longer. He knows, like, he talks to Feck about how he's going to fry for what he did, essentially. But that he prefers that to ending up like Feck, which is another interesting thing. That he prefers going to the electric chair or going to prison instead of ending up like Feck has, with just being very sad, I guess, sort of broken man. And then in the next scene, Samson is sleeping by the river still, and Feck actually puts a gun to his own head, and he starts crying. And this is a very pivotal scene because it cuts away and we hear a gunshot, so we don't actually know what happened there. But then we do actually see Feck returning to his house, so then there's only one conclusion to draw there, essentially, that he did not shoot himself, but we still don't really know exactly what happened, which I thought was interesting. So, and then the two kids, Tim and his friend who had broken in to his house, are still there. And one of them hits Feck over the head and it knocks him out, and they take his gun. And it's also like not only the image of this dead woman, Jeremy, but it's like this gun keeps coming back. I noticed as well. Yeah. It's very like it's like the potential for more harm to be done. I saw it as, like these characters are already like in this like really disturbing situation and they don't know what to do. And it's like this gun is just constantly there. And Feck is always carrying it around with them. But it's almost like he doesn't even want to hold it. It's like it's like that significant to him. But it keeps coming back. And so Tim ends up taking it. And the police take Lane in for questioning. And this is where you kind of see that the walls are closing in on everyone. Like eventually the cops are going to, take someone away. Something's going to
They're going to figure something out.
Yeah, they're getting close here. So you kind of feel that tension. So you have that scene with the teacher in the classroom, which I thought was pretty good as well, because it's a little different. It's like the adults trying to understand the feelings of the teenagers, and we see Clarissa in class there, and the teacher's so angry, and she's like shouting at her, and he's like, "Are you upset?" It's like, and again, it's like the surrogate for the audience almost. It's like,
which is interesting because talking once again going back to this idea of generational differences. You take someone from kind of the love generation, someone who's maybe a former hippie, and their whole MO is when something happens, it's significant, and you have to react, and you have to fight, and you have to, come at it. Whereas, I feel like the Generation X attitude is kind of a little bit more like,
whatever.
All right, something happened. Let's like smoke a cigarette and read a book and talk about. It's like it's not about the fight. It's about the whatever. It's just another thing. We're above it.
It's apathy. It's whatever you want to call it. It's just what can I do about it, sort of thing. Or I don't even want to do anything about it, I guess.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's definitely on display in this film, that sort of generational thing there. And then, so at this point, Lane calls Feck, and he asks him where John is, and Feck just says, John's gone. And that's when the police storm into Feck's house, and they take him away. And so Matt and some others, they see Ellie's body, the doll, the inflatable doll, in the river, and it's stuck on some branches, and they like wonder what she's doing there, and they're kind of, again, they're always kind of hanging out around this river. I guess it's like, the place to be, I guess. But one of the teens, he says something in the scene I thought was pretty good. He's just talking about like, got to make the best of it while we're alive, and saying how we could get killed or bombed by the Russians. I mean, there's some Cold War commentary going on here. Obviously, this was during that time, and so it's on everyone's mind, and that kind of goes along with the apathy. It's like whatever the world. And I think actually Samson has a line, and I'm going to play a clip from it in this episode. But he says something like, "The world's going to blow up anyway." Yeah. And that's pretty like telling line, I think, for the generational viewpoint, I guess, that they're trying to show here. So, and then Matt tells Lane, he finally tells Lane that he turned Samson in. And Lane, gets really angry. He storms off, and he's calling for John because he still doesn't know. And he finds his body lying there on the ground, and he starts crying, which is the scene that you were mentioning, Jeremy. And it leads the others to come find Samson as well. John is Samson, by the way. I should reiterate that. Kind of go back and forth here, but so at this point, not only is all this going on, but then Tim arrives, Matt's brother, and he points a gun at him. And at this point, like, you really don't know what to expect from this film. So and I'd seen this film before, like years ago, and even I forgot. I'm like, wait, does he shoot him? Like, what? How does
I was totally ready for it to happen.
Yeah, I couldn't remember, and I was like, oh, that would be an interesting ending, actually.
Yeah.
But Matt is able to kind of talk him down, I guess. But Tim's like, Matt, you shouldn't have hit me, because he had kind of gotten on him earlier. Yeah. They were kind of tussling around, but Matt's able to reason with him and talk him into lowering the gun. And, Lane's just like bawling, like you said, like a little child, just, beside himself, just like saying they killed him, and when he said they killed him, what do you think he meant by that exactly?
Yeah, I couldn't quite figure that out. I think maybe he thought it was the police.
Yeah.
And it was just a moment where his brain wasn't totally functioning as it should be, because obviously if it was the police, there would be police around.
Yeah, it's just like they killed him. Yeah, it's almost like, I don't know. I mean, you could get really deep here, but it's like they. What does that even mean?
I mean, I think you could say it would be police. You could say it would be
like the older generation.
Social pressures.
Yeah, the squares. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a combination of all of the above.
Right. Or it's just like nonsense. Like, he doesn't know who to blame, so he's just saying they. It's like someone has to be to blame, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting too with that character relationship, because I almost couldn't figure out what the draw between Lane and John was. I didn't really get the sense that they were that close. Like, I mean, like you said, it was kind of that code.
Yeah.
Of you don't turn on your friends.
Oh, but you mean Lane and John, or Samson or whatever?
Between the two of them, because it was like clearly Lane has this like deep love for John, but like it didn't seem like John gave a shit about Lane at all.
That was the funny thing, and it's also like I think Lane. I saw it as Lane just loving the outcast, like he's an outcast or sees himself as like a rebel, sort of.
Yeah, maybe
I saw it as like he sees John as like the ultimate rebel or outcast, in some sort of sick way. You know what I mean? It's sort of like that punk rock thing where it's like you want to
be different.
Yeah, you put someone on a pedestal who's like, maybe they're even vile or disgusting in some way, but you just kind of, you look to that as like an example or something. So that's how I kind of saw it. Like you said, Samson or John doesn't even, he hardly even reacts to Lane. Like he hardly even talks to him.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Like Lane's like crying over him. He's driving around town trying to help him. And like John's like, whatever, dude. Like,
it's like whatever. Yeah. Like, or like Lane's like, oh, we should move her. She's too heavy. Like,
But that was the thing that was particularly strange to me and intriguing. And I'd like to rewatch at some point and see if I can pick this apart a little bit more. It seems like this girl, Jamie, who died, was in their friend group as much as anyone else.
Yeah, it does seem like that.
And that was...
But then also, like, is she, or was she, like, the way they talk about everything.
Yeah, because I don't know, because it's like, everyone keeps saying that, like, we knew her, we hung out with her, but it didn't seem like she was anyone's best friend, but at the same time, she was clearly around.
Yeah.
And
that high school thing where it's like, everyone knows everyone, but no one really knows anyone.
Yeah, no one really knows anyone. Yeah, because it's like... But that's what's so interesting, is the relationships in this movie, which goes back to the idea, I guess, of it not really having a main character, because... I think if there was a close relationship, if in the movie, and I guess the closest one we got, which is why I go back to maybe saying I kind of think the Keanu Reeves character was the main character, is the two brothers ultimately do have love between them, even if it gets really intense and the younger brother's actually ready to kill him. We do get a moment where where we see real love between two human beings on screen.
Yeah, there's something good there. Yeah.
Yeah, because it doesn't really feel like any of the teenagers are actually really that close. Like, I don't get the sense, what's her name, Clarissa, that, like, Clarissa and Matt, after their night together, are necessarily going to go on and keep being together. I don't get the sense that through all these experiences, any of these characters are going to be drawn closer together.
Yeah, it's not like an eternal love or anything. It's just
Yeah,
it's like whatever. Like this is what we're doing right now.
And maybe coming back, like this idea of it being a grim movie, and I think that might be what kind of confused me. Is it did feel like there was just like everyone in this movie was very alone.
Yeah, it's haunting, is what it is. Like
it's haunting.
It's a haunting film. If when you're watching it and when you think back on it, it still is. But we'll talk about that in a second. I mean, we're almost at the end. This is basically the end of the film. But I just want to cover really quickly just what happens from here. So, like I said, Lane is crying over the body of his friend John Samson and saying they killed him. And we talked about what we believe that to mean. And then from there, there's just a couple more scenes, but we see Feck in the hospital. And what I believe was a hospital, and where the police have taken him, I guess. And he's talking, and I don't even know if we see who he's talking to. I would assume it's like a detective or something. But he's saying he didn't love her, talking about John, and saying he didn't feel a thing. At least I loved her. And he says, I lost a good friend today. And you assume that he's talking about Ellie, the doll. So there's a couple dolls in this film, actually. I just realized that. The doll in the beginning. The one that Matt's sister buries, and this doll as well. So that's interesting. So he seems very heartbroken, and with Feck, he is a hell of a character because it's like he's so strange, but you don't know you don't know if what he's saying is real. And I think we've all known people like this in real life where they'll be talking about something and we'll kind of just be nodding along, but really in the back of our head, it's like, this could be complete bullshit. Like we have no idea. And he's so strung out and everything. And so mentally not there that really this whole story could be made up, that he's telling us about the gun. That's something
I had that thought
crossed my mind. Right. Which if that's true is just even more crazy to think about. But, and that is essentially the end. So we have that scene in the hospital with Feck, and the very last scene is pretty much a shot of Jamie's open casket funeral. And that's how it ends, with, again, the image of Jamie's body.
Jamie's face,
and her face. Body, and we see, and now she's obviously more, presentable or whatever you want to call it for the funeral. But that's where it ends. So we're kind of still left with that image of the dead body still lingering there. And hell of a movie. It's I think the only word really is haunting. It's just very strange. And we talked about how there's all the different characters, and it's a script I think works really well, though. I think it's very well written. And actually I should give a shout out to the writer, because he didn't do much besides this. I did look him up, but Neil, am I saying this wrong? Jimenez?
Probably Jimenez.
Yes, Neil Jimenez, probably. Yeah. And he, like I said, he didn't do too much else. But I really thought the script for this was strong. And as I alluded to earlier, this was actually, it was somewhat based on a real life murder of a young girl named Marcy Conrad. And it was by another teenager. She was actually very young. She was, I believe, 14 when I looked into it. And she was murdered by her, I think, boyfriend or friend, who was 16 at the time. And I believe it was in a small town, much like we see in this film. And he bragged about it to his friends after he killed her. And he showed them the body. And for 2 days, no one reacted or said anything to anyone, to the police at least. So it took 2 days for someone to finally step up and go to the police, which, when I say that this film is sort of realistic in a lot of ways, I think that's what I mean. It's like, this could actually happen, and it did actually happen in some way. So, but that was what inspired this film. So the writer took that and made the script from it, and I think it's actually like a very tight script, but it also, I liked how it gave the scenes and the actors a lot of room to breathe. There's a lot of really good scenes, particularly the scene with Feck and Samson in, I think they're at Feck's house in that scene. And that's the scene I'm going to play a clip from in this episode as well in the beginning. But I just thought it was a really good scene between the two of them. Just really, really well done. The acting is phenomenal. And you forget with Dennis Hopper, at least I did, how good an actor he is, because he's great in this, and I just like was thinking that he's great in general, and I forgot how good.
Yeah.
He is.
He's one of my favorites. Probably ever.
Yeah, he's like one of the best.
He's also is this somehow the first time have we talked about another Dennis Hopper film on this podcast? We have to have, right?
We
or
must.
Is this the first time? Like I was thinking about it, I'm like, we have. There's no way we've been doing Cult Movie Cult this long that have not talked about Dennis Hopper.
Well, we haven't talked about the Mario Brothers movie yet.
Didn't talk about Mario. We didn't talk about Easy Rider. So
Easy Rider. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, I couldn't remember. I was like, did we talk about Easy Rider? I know we wanted to. I'm sure we will. But
yeah. So but
Easy Rider actually gets mentioned. It gets name dropped in this.
Yeah, which I thought that was a funny thing. Yeah. I wonder if they talked to him.
Yeah.
Or how he felt, but
yeah, he's done it all. I mean, he's Apocalypse Now. He's just been in so many.
He was in Giant with James Dean in the 50s. Dennis
Hopper, that's right. I forgot about that.
He had one of the he was in Giant. I was actually looking at his filmography before, and I haven't seen these movies or seen them in a long time. Mm-hmm. But I know he was in. He was in, like, if you look at his filmography, which I know we're going on a little bit of a tangent, but it's just because we haven't talked about Dennis Hopper.
We have to,
yeah. Just because we haven't talked about Dennis Hopper. He's been in so many movies. He was in Cool Hand Luke. It says he had a bit part. I guess he had a part in True Grit with John Wayne. He's just had the Trip.
Yeah, that career was... Yeah.
He's just had one of those careers that is just.
Well, he's kind of like Nicholson. Like I'm sure Nicholson will Jack Nicholson will get brought up a lot in this show, just in general, and he has been brought up in the past, like when we talked about Head, the Monkeys movie and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, just like these certain people that are kind of like cult figures because they've appeared in so many cult films and just kind of like offbeat films and stuff like that. So Dennis Hopper is definitely one of those, and because he's in. He's in Blue Velvet. Like he's just one of my. I would say he's probably one of my favorites. Whenever he shows up, it's just like you're in for a ride. So he's great in this. And another actor I could go on a tangent about is Crispin Glover, but I will try to restrain myself somewhat. But he is. What can you say about Crispin Glover? He's just off the wall, and in everything he from mainstream films that he's appeared in. So very. Most notably, he was in Back to the Future. He played the Marty McFly's father in that film, and he had a huge part in that. But there were some behind the scenes, things going on where he wanted more money, or there's lots of speculation. But for whatever reason, he didn't appear in the other movies. But so he's just in that first one. But he's shown up in some pretty mainstream things. He's in like the Charlie Angels movies and stuff like that. But it's funny because the thing about Crispin Glover is that he juxtaposes those types of roles with his much stranger roles, much like this one in River's Edge, and he was in Willard where he controls rats, and he's also a filmmaker himself. He makes very abstract experimental films, which he travels around and shows them like in kind of like a roadshow presentation. So he's a very odd and unique character, and he's been very blunt and on record saying that he does the larger films, the more mainstream films, to supplement his income, and so he can make weird films and do the stranger things, and he's very much like an artist, I guess, is at the end of the day. So you see a lot of that come through in his acting. He's very off the wall, and he's also in a Friday the 13th movie, the fourth one, I believe. But anyway, so that's I mean, again, I could talk about Crispin Glover all day. He also shows up in a Lynch movie, by the way, David Lynch. He shows up in Wild at Heart in a very quick flashback scene, but very memorable.
Yeah, right.
So anyway. But yeah, so this cast, and also Keanu Reeves, which again, he's just like he's always good, and he's good in this in his own way. And but I did want to ask you, Jeremy, since these great performances, who had your favorite performance in this film?
This is gonna be a surprise pick. My favorite performance in this film, and I just want to double check the actor's name really quickly. My favorite performance was the guy actually who played John, Andor Samson.
I was going to mention him as well.
Daniel Roebuck. I say that because Dennis Hopper, I would imagine, is an intense person to
share a scene with, right?
Not. I mean, I don't know. I'm not speaking to his personality. I've obviously heard stories, but just in terms of someone who's like that explosive on camera, and I found myself during the scenes with Dennis Hopper and this actor Daniel Roebuck, watching Daniel Roebuck and really zoning in on his performance.
He holds his own for sure.
So yeah, something so cold and removed, but also really fragile and delicate. So I don't know, in a movie full of really wild performances, for some reason that one actually was the one that really stood out to me.
For sure. Yeah, I want to mention him as well. He's Daniel Roebuck. He plays John or Samson, and yeah, he puts in a great performance as well. I mean, like you said, he goes toe to toe with Dennis Hopper in a lot of scenes, and just playing just such a different character, but so unique and fascinating to watch in its own way. And it's strange because I feel like, as odd as his character is, we've all known someone like that in
Absolutely.
school. You know what I mean? And I thought of like at least a couple people that just like I hadn't thought of in years, but when I watched this movie, I was like, you know what? He reminds me of that strange guy who I used to see. You know what I mean? So he has that sort of quality to him. And I don't remember him in much other than this film, but he is really great in this. And I'd be curious to see maybe some other things from him. But yeah, we need to mention him as well. I'm glad you brought him up, Jeremy, because he needs to be mentioned as well. So,
what about you? Did you have a particular performance that you were drawn to?
I mean, Dennis Hopper is the one that I always think of when I think of, him and Crispin Glover. But I think Dennis Hopper, like I said, because before when I'd seen it years ago, I remembered a little bit of it, but I was like, I just remembered like how crazy it was and how sort of off, I keep saying offbeat, but how crazy Dennis Hopper's character is in this and everything. But when I watched it again, I just had a new respect for him in this. And so I think he really was my favorite in it, just because not only is he playing such an odd, memorable character, but he plays him so well. And he's so vulnerable and just like, I don't know. there's something about him that is just so sad. I mean, everyone in this is sad in their own way, but he's the one who sticks out for me. Maybe it's the inflatable doll. I don't know. But but I mean that everyone gives a good solid performance in it. And Tim Hunter, I want to just touch on him for a moment, and there's really not much to touch on. He's the director of this, but he didn't do much else besides this film in terms of actual like motion pictures. He may have been a good candidate for a one-hit wonder series, Jeremy.
Yeah, this would have been it. Well, sometimes there's nice crossover.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
And sometimes things fall through the cracks, but we can't talk about everything. But I did find that interesting that he directed this film and a couple others, but he went on to primarily be a TV director. Still a very respectable career. He's actually associated, like I said, with Twin Peaks and some very esteemed series, which we mentioned already in this conversation, but never had another film that resonated quite like River's Edge. So and also this was as obviously it's in this series, so it was a independent film, budget of 1.9, certainly not nothing, but still by Hollywood standards certainly lower than most, I guess. So yeah, any final thoughts you want to say about it?
No, interesting trip, definitely worth checking out. I'm glad at this point.
I'm glad you got to, because you said you hadn't seen it before this, so I'm glad you were able to see it. And
this is one, and maybe I'm just it somehow was missed in my film education, but it wasn't a movie I knew much about at all.
It's a hard one. It's a hard one to pin down. It's a hard one to explain.
Yeah, so definitely, I think it's if you feel so inclined and you're talking to your film friends about it, pass it along, because it's always exciting to revive gems from the past.
Exactly. That's partly what we try to do here. So. I'm glad we were able to do it with this one. And that will do it for River's Edge. Next, we are going to close out our series on 80s indies with the Jim Jarmusch film Mystery Train. And that is certainly quirky and interesting in its own way. I think it'll be a fun one to close the series out for sure. Yep. So please watch along and listen to us discuss Mystery Train on our last episode of the series. For right now, thanks for listening to Cult Movie Cult. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you have any cult films you'd like to hear us discuss on the show, or if you'd like to officially join the cult and be a guest, please feel free to reach out to us at cultmoviecult@gmail.com. This has been Cult Movie Cult, and until next time, so long from the other side.